Hi, this is Professor George Lees. I'm going to be covering more of the writing of Greg Hallett. This is an image of Christopher Columbus, who claims to have discovered America, and as a joke at that, the G8 countries went to Genoa in 2001, the year that they brought the Twin Towers down, so that they could storm into Iraq and then into Afghanistan and demonize Islam. Greg tells the truth about all of those things. His websites have been revamped, as I'll show you now, and that still does not convince me that the guy's alive. I know that he has the courage to get in touch with me if he's still alive, and to relate to me what has actually happened to his campaign of truths. Everything has stopped dead since last I talked to him on Skype, and I've sent several messages to the same Skype address to try and get him back into the narrative, and all of the evidence that he's produced is what I want to get out and to continue to relay to the world. Okay, so this is his website, and one of his particularly potent pieces of writing came from this particular book. It's much smaller than the one that we've covered already, which was Hitler was a British agent, but this is How to Take Over the World, a Right Royal Con by Greg Hallett and the Spy Master. Most of the British royal family are illegitimate, including Prince Consort Albert, King Edward VII and his son Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill was first cousin with Adolf Hitler's father and uncle to Anthony Blunt, King Edward VIII and King George VI. Adolf Hitler's grandfather ran the Rothschild Bank, the Bank of England, and was the first Jewish MP in British Parliament, not until they changed the laws. Prince Albert was also the son of a stable boy. Close to bankruptcy, the British royal family were saved by another stable boy, John Brown, who went on to marry Queen Victoria after Albert died. The British royal family are a subset of the Rothschild family, and the Rothschilds control all the wars and finances of the British monarchy. The British royal family declare war as soon as the Rothschilds have completed their preparations. This makes for huge profits. Many royals died of syphilis, and many others died from the treatment of syphilis. When a British royal didn't like his wife, he simply ordered her murder on their coronation night. This was repeated again 166 years later with the murder of Princess Diana, as covered up by Lord Stevens. He's a relatively local man, and he's a university vice-chancellor at Northumbria, just down the road from me, and several of his staff members I've given lectures to, and I know that he's Lord Stevens of Kirkwelpington, which takes him right into the local region. Former head of the Metropolitan Police. All of the usual narrative is on Lord Condon of G4S's chairing of inquests into Diana's death. All intelligence is now counterintelligence. The media is a counterintelligence organisation. The media backs every war. The role of the media and embedded historians is to surround the truth with a bodyguard of lies. Now, I've only got one chapter of this to analyse, but when I read it, it made such a profound impression on me that I need to read it out to you like I did the other day on the issues all around World War II and the double agents and the treason in every participating nation. Table of contents. Chapter 1. The Catholic Con, the Jewish Con, the Anglican Con, the Hanover Con, and Royal Eugenics. House 2. How Scotland lost its Parliament, the Scottish Cons. 3. The Mad King Georges. 4. Missing time, calendar changes. 5. The Queen Victoria Cons, the Rothschild Con. 6. Syphilis, the Royal Pox, 1494 onwards. No end to that in Greg's brief index. 7. Post-war social patterns, ecclesiastical and etymological scatolinguistics of fuck. Now that might sound rude, but that is the shocking chapter that tells you about feudalism and how brutal the world was up to 1914, and I'm going to read that a sample from that chapter to you to show you just how lucky we are to live in the generations that we live in. They are the luckiest generations that ever lived on this earth, and I will emphasize that to you by reading out Greg's samples of his writing. Chapter 8, the Rothschild-Hitler family tree. Most of the British royal family are illegitimate. 9. Current counterintelligence. The dirty wars never ends. The media are bastards. They just sell every country that they operate in to greedy genocidal leaders. Okay, that's my interpretation of it. Let me take you to Greg's sample, which caught my eye and has been publicised on my website for some months already, and I'm gonna now take you right there and tell you about post-war social patterns, ecclesiastical and etymological scatolinguistics of fuck. Okay, I'm not going to read one of the paragraphs because there are so many uses of that word, the F word, but I'm going to take you through it word by word as Greg describes it, and if we need to, we'll go to Google Images and illustrate the concepts that he brings across. Okay, the dictionary defines fuck as sexual intercourse, a partner of sexual intercourse, to mess about, to fool around, to curse, to confound, to express anger and annoyance, to make a mess, a blunder, to state nothing, to disturb emotionally, to meddle, muddle or abuse. Okay, it can be used at, now I'm just going to point the camera at this, it can be used as, I'll just use the word, the letter F for the main word that it is describing. It can be used as effed up, F up, F all, effing, effedness, F the thing, F around, effing useless, I'm all effed up, that effer, and I want to F that, F them, F you, well F me, effing arse, R for F's sake, and F I feel like a king. It gained popularity in the 1500s and again in World War I and hasn't let up since. It's the most universal word and the word that holds the most historic secrets. It's the key to our world. F is considered a swear word because it explains history better than any other word. The dictionary concedes its origins are unknown and from the 1500s, but we know better. F became popular at the same time as syphilis became endemic in Europe. The 1500s. Christopher Columbus, as we've seen on that previous image, let's just see if we can. Christopher Columbus was of Spanish heritage but grew up in Genoa, Italy. When he wanted to discover America, he tried the Prince of Portugal for funding but was refused, so he went to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain, who vacillated, then agreed. Leonardo da Vinci, let's have a wee look at him. He's the scientist, I believe, that proclaimed that the world was round and not flat. Big beard. Okay, famous for his artistry and for his depictions of religious events. Okay, you know all the data now on the frauds that are religions, and I'm telling you about the fraud that is the discovery of America, which occurred 300 years too late. Okay, let's get back to that, and let's bring Greg up front again. How do we do it? We bring that one up to full screen, and that one up to full screen, and then we bring that one back up and we make it wee. How do we make it wee? There we go. So there's is Nibs the artist, and I believe he was a scientist as well, and Leonardo da Vinci secretly gave Christopher Columbus a globe of the world with America already clearly marked on it. Columbus then left in August 1492 to discover, in inverted commas, America with the usual group of dishevelled sailors, make-believes and ragtags. White people had been living in America for the previous 3 centuries, but that didn't matter. It was a royal fanfare and they were going to discover a country. I think I've already explained to you in my website pages how the Council of Europe was founded by people that include people that actually lived on the American continent, in Latin America and up near the Newfoundland region, and the Newfoundland bit is a bit of a clue. Okay, so to carry on with Greg's story, a royal discovery involves all the typical aspects of conquests like rape and pillage, but peculiar to the Spaniards was the rape of llamas, and the llamas adapted by developing the ability to spit behind their backs to accurately hit the ragtag dishevelled buggers behind them. Strangely, when llamas were later exported to New Zealand, they lost the spitting gene. Now that's a funny story, and I can show you a llama if you want to, but you can learn to use Google Images, and I'm really sorry that I forgot to portray the religious fraud and the role of the chameleons in the story about the Pisos the other day, and I will get you a picture on chameleons and insert that into that story later on. Okay, to carry on with how to take over the world, page 144 in Greg's samples, European languages, titles and sex. In the 1400s and 1500s, the common and elite languages merged all across Europe. The joining force was the age of chivalry, which erroneously began from a dropped garter in 1128, as it expressed King Edward III's love for the opposite sex and witchcraft. Witches wore garters. From the British monarchy's love of witches came the most noble order of the garter. It was sexual love that was breaking down the classes, and all one had to do to bed a royal was to be a witch or sell oranges at the local theatre. How I long for civilization. All of a sudden, every class had something in common: the health-giving climax and oranges. As music was a strain to be tolerated, it was sex that was healing the world and healing the wound. But along with this came the syphilis pandemic, and it spread across Europe faster than a llama could spit. Let's get you a llama just for the hell of it. I could get you a garter, but that might get me arrested. There we go. I don't fancy it much. What about you? It's got ears a bit like Prince Charles. Right, let's get back to Greg's little narrative. Okay. It spread across Europe faster than a llama could spit. So fuck came about with a great confluence of forces never seen before or since. There was a flurry of languages developing right across Europe. The printing press with movable type was developed by Johann Gutenberg in 1450, and we've told these stories about the publication of the Bible and the capturing of the world's minds with that, and the earthquakes that followed the printing press and the Bible all around the world. In Scotland, the first issue was in Aberdeen, just to the south of Aberdeen, and they had a force 5 quake that year. John Wycliffe tried to publish the Bible in English in the 1490s, but was fucked over by the Catholic Church. The Bible was printed in English for the first time 45 years later in 1535, 85 years after the printing press, and in German 13 years prior in 1522. This created a Germanic influence on language and ideas that gave their swear words more mileage or more miles. The aristocratic Anglo-Norman and peasant English languages were mating, as were the classes. The florin, worth 6 shillings and 8 pence, that's 6s, 8d, had recently become the currency most valued above all other currencies, such as trade, providing a service, cooking, healing, loyalty, goodwill, life, faith, health, etc. In some cases, health and wealth were exchanged. Land was becoming valuable as it was able to be bought with money, which gave one freedom, ability to have a family and to be a worthwhile husband by owning land for domesticated livestock. Okay? And we heard Greg telling you about the hero and the heterosexual male being the person that looked after the animals and the welfare of the United Family Group. Peasants could farm livestock and eat protein from something bigger than a rat, giving themselves enough energy at the end of the day to learn, make jokes, and thereby develop the English language through roving humour. The, in inverted commas, socio-economic, military, monarchical feudalism was collapsing in cycles. 1550s, as this mating took place. 300 years later, John Le Fucker made his mark in John Florio's 1598 Italian English, a world with an E on the end of words, which lists F complete with scatolinguistic definitions. With English in its infancy, the printing press just starting up, printing the first Common English book, Sir Thomas More's Utopia, 1516. Spelling was up for grabs and prone to influence. Letters such as S with F and U, V and W were interchangeable. This meant that words were spelt differently to how they were pronounced, and were spelt and pronounced differently in different areas. To cope with this, rhymes were made so that language could be remembered. English developed out of guttural words and rhymes. This gave it a richness, and Shakespeare was a noted recorder of this common English, never poor in its influence. During feudalism, relations between the lord and vassal were interdependent and were based around the ownership of land as fief or fief husbanddoms. That's F-I. It's not so easy on this little computer than in my living room or my jointly owned living room at the moment. So it's fief husbanddoms. Anything less than the required 26 acres was a CUNT. the C word. Now I've got no idea how that relates to the acreage of a field, but Greg is describing it, and I believe that he will have the insight to understand it fully. Anything less than the required 26 acres was a C, comma, which meant it was too small to farm and raise a family. With agricultural productivity in its infancy, the 26 acres required for a husbandom limited the population of England, and you needed at least one other to drive the second ox-gang. Male offspring were also used for the 40-day wars, which could in turn reduce rental on the land to something approaching nothing. For the transitional period of the 14 to 1500s, the meaning of the possessive noun swive, S-W-I-V, and the verb fuck were interchangeable. F won out as the exclamatory swear word, and swive had a calming effect and became wife. F was used if your land became untenable or if the productive area had been turned into a sea, as in losing a war or losing some of your land. Fief or fief meant ownership of land, also ties in nicely with F, leading to you saying effing fief when referring to the landlord taking the rent, being evicted from the land after a bad harvest, not having a son or a father of age or health to send into the 40-day summer war, and more recently the wife taking the land. Swine. Ah, goodness me, isn't he insightful? Isn't his history different to everything else that you've heard before? In turn, rent comes from wrench it out of my hands. Oh my goodness. Rent comes from wrench it out of my hands, and C comes from making aspects of one's life untenable, including untenable. First degree incest involved mothers and sons, fathers and daughters, brothers and sisters. All other forms of incest, like uncles and nieces, aunts and nephews and cousins, were considered legal and were common enough, as travelling large distances was only available after the harvest, which was usually taken up by the 40-day summer war, after which, that's a ritual summer war, after which winter set in and travel over long distances with bad roads was difficult. Feudal life and 40-day summer wars made life one of enforced incest unless the war was won, and rape and pillage were claimed. As a result, up to 80% of all marriages were incestuous. Can you see how lucky we were to be born after 1914? In any of the wars the church created, the man was expected to fight. I've told you about the fraud that is Christianity and the church. This is how it impacted on the ordinary family group. In any wars the church created, comma, the man was expected to fight. If he died, any children he had were automatically called orphans by virtue of being fatherless, even though they had a mother. This, in brackets, was the case until 1900, and more often than not, the Catholic Church would take in the orphan, especially if he was a little dark, hyphen, chocolate was their favourite, hyphen, and do their best to turn him into a repeat pattern paedophile, and preferably a repeat pattern reverend or paedophile priest. It takes your breath away. Cardinal O'Brien has never been brought to justice, even with the accusations hanging over his head, which are nothing compared to these revelations. That's my little bit. This was still the case up to 2005, and it is questionable whether the practice has stopped. Nobody knows where Archbishop O'Brien is, close friend of Jimmy Savile's. Jimmy Savile's reputation has been lost, and Pope Benedict is in an elite hotel in the Alba region of Italy. Does not get more elite than that. The motor car and photography hadn't yet made it into the family, and priests were one of the few groups that could afford to commission a painting. So often the glorified person in history was the most influential paedophile. It's not that different today. And you've seen the images that I published earlier this week on the head of John the Baptist on a plate for King Herod that was tied into the families and the Caesars that wrote the Christian Bible. Yeah, we're talking now though about the 1500s onwards, and there we're talking about things that were launched in 1900 and could be run up to 2005. Whenever the priests ran out of children, and do not believe that this is confined to Catholicism, yeah, every religion has the same motives. Largely now though, they are shackled by political correctness, and they are confined to running the money stream. Whenever the priests ran out of children, they would send the fathers off to war. It didn't matter if the wars weren't too well planned, as either way they got the children. If they lost the war, they would claim their church was a sanctuary, invite in the victors, explain the make-up of their society, who was who, and how to take over that society with minimal damage. When push came to shove, reverends and priests were nearly always double agents. Let's get some images up to add some feudal Christianity. Oh, not many images of history there. We've got images of the world's owners and the ranking system. Let's get Christianity 18th century, somewhere in the middle. Yeah, it's all a bit bland. Let's look at Christianity 20th century, 19th century. Most of the countries are absolutely converted by now, and what happens in Christianity in this phase is that you just get the breaking up into denomination after denomination, and issues arising that they need to address as moralists. Listen to the more of the moralist story that Greg is telling here. It's lawless. In any wars up to 2005, whenever the priests ran out of children, they would send the fathers off to war. It didn't matter if the wars weren't too well planned, as either way they got the children. If they lost the war, they would claim their church was a sanctuary, invite in the victors, explain the make-up of their society, who was who, and how to take over that society with minimal damage. When push came to shoves, reverends and priests were nearly always double agents. And we've heard about the nuns and the joke that that represents about the nomenclature that was imposed on the naming of Jesus and the people in the Piso family that came up with the name nun. We now know that the Catholic priests and Anglican reverends have had a long history of paedophilia and are very often paedophiles and child sex abusers to this day. What we haven't yet fathomed is that lesbians are twice as likely to be paedophiles as gays are, and nuns are yet to be exposed. Nuns have a long history of sadistic behaviour towards children, which has bordered on the sexual and perverse. Lesbians who make up the majority of nuns are the primary suppliers of children to paedophiles to this day, as are lesbians within social services. Remember, this is not George Lees's opinion, it's Greg Hallett's opinions, and Greg Hallett is the most informed historian of the real history that I have met. This bit I've never heard in any televised interviews. Okay? Fornication under consent of the king, page 154 of How to Take Over the World. FUCK with dots in between was often signposted above brothels, and it meant fornication under consent of the king, effectively a legitimate tax-paying brothel, after which the patrons would say, "That was great, I feel like a king." Of all the English adapted and evolved words, F had travelled the furthest, spread the widest, and gained the greatest acceptance, and the least acceptance from those hiding it to the most, the aristocracy with syphilis being the origin of the term blue blood. This all reinforces F as the world's most important word, as blessed by the king, and it ties in quite nicely with the feudal social system based around military service for sexual freedom. F was removed from the dictionary in the 1700s, but gained popularity in World War I, and was even noted by the embedded historians. Those behind World War I wanted all aspects of the war deleted, and this was achieved with the Spanish flu, in brackets 50 million dead as opposed to 10 million from World War I. Wow. And the removal of all language peculiar to World War I. This included F and a whole host of World War I slang, poetic, grunty and concise, like "no crimed glass house for this glory hole," "no crimed to be put in charge, glass house is prison or detention centre for this glory hole which is a dugout. He won't be placed in charge, put in the trenches or charged for non-service. No chance of nobility being court-martialed." In conjunction with the church abbots, sex was banned until marriage, and marriage required the ownership of land big enough to raise a family and house the required animals, hence husbandland. So can you see how harsh it was? Can you see how eunuchs could be singing in the church? They had no other use for their genitalia. You were not allowed to have sex unless you had sufficient property, hence husbandland. This meant that military service had to be done and land grabbed for the church in exchange for rape and pillage rights abroad. That's sex rights abroad in brackets, land at home, marriage blessing and possibly a knighthood. Can you see how it all is twisted against the biological rules that the gods gave us, and about tyranny and suppression for all of human history, right up to the 1700s? and beyond. I believe, I remember the last time I read it, a knighthood gave something approximating knight rights and prima nocte or droit du seigneur. This included farming, hunting and sex outside marriage, advancing oneself towards legitimate sex, marriage and land ownership involved a lot of brown nosing and bravery, but it allowed one to become a husband. If one wanted to have sex, it was through the vassal lord or the church. It's the same with gender politics today. Pear's Encyclopedia, 86th edition, 1977, J21, that's the citation at the bottom. Then on to page 169, and it now is Helen Clark, continuing her cover-ups, and they had long been prepared. Often up-and-coming politicians and up-and-coming reporters will make a contract of collusion so that if either is attacked, the other will deny for them, and then they will promote each other. This contract is almost always set in concrete with sex. That's Clark, that's McNaught. You can find this on the internet if I run out of batteries. I've gotten over the bit that I wanted to relay to you. The political perversion is in every country across the globe now. Hallett's portrayals are particularly relevant to New Zealand, where he lived for most of his life. Okay, I'll keep going until we run out. So this contract is almost always set in concrete with sex. When the politician needs a distraction, the reporter plays their part in that distraction. This has been repeated with Helen Clark's close associate and fellow KGB agent Margaret Wilson, former Attorney General and now Speaker of the House. You remember the devil's advocate reference to why the law died? It's quite obvious. The law allows you to get away with murder, literally, and the things that we've heard about already in this little narrative. Okay, that's genocide, that's perpetual war. Okay, and now Speaker of the House, the person who rules over parliamentary debate. Margaret Wilson has been having an ongoing affair with Herald reporter Colin James, who is often mistaken for Helen Clark's husband Peter Davis. Next paragraph. After 7th June 2006 incident with another of Peter Davis's homosexual child sex abuses, Helen Clark needed a distraction. Parliament closed down from Thursday the 17th August to Tuesday the 5th September 2006, so a distraction was required before, during and after the break. In February 1993, Helen Clark had sex with TV New Zealand reporter Anita McNaught, confirmed by intelligence. Anita then moved to TV3, that's her, with a boyish looking haircut, with a man called Wig. Okay, in February 1980, Anita then moved to TV3 in 1995 and to the BBC in 1997. After the sex with Helen Clark, Anita McNaught went around Auckland hitting on any guy she thought she could manipulate into providing cover for her lesbianism. And there's pictures of Wig and Sentani. She hit a lot on guys, many of them my friends. This is Greg Hallett's writing, in brackets, a New Zealand Herald photographer and an optometrist, and they reported back, "What is this woman doing hitting on me? She's a lesbian. She even looks like a boy." I replied she took one look at me and gave up for the next guy. All the men ran away, and Anita McNaught finally settled on the effeminate son of Methodist Reverend Roger Wig, no doubt raising his son to provide cover. Olaf Wig was working in Auckland as a freelancer and later worked in Wellington for TV3 and Marmalade Vision. They married in 1998. In August 2006, Helen Clark needed another story to distract from her husband being arrested in a toilet at San Francisco airport, so she pulled in some favours. Helen Clark had seconded the motion for Sean Elias to be Chief Justice. Why the Law Dad, who presided over a swish whereby a minimum of $500 million, which was due to the Chinese, got transposed to another location. China threatened to declare war on New Zealand. The most likely repository for the money was the British possessions in the Caribbean, going over to Dutch and French possessions in the Caribbean run by Israel. The Israelis came up with an arrangement with the Chinese, then exerted pressure on the New Zealand contacts to sponsor them in New Zealand, and in turn they would do any murders they required. This all came to pass, including the murders of Sir Peter Elworthy, historian Michael King, and MP Rod Donald. Murder by arrangement with the Mossad has spread to Prime Minister Helen Clark, and she had a meeting with General Moshe Yaalon in late November 2006. General Yaalon was to secretly return to New Zealand on the 5th to 8th December 2006 to inspect the training fields in New Zealand's South Island, that's Fiordland, for jungle warfare training, to discuss Israel supplying heroin to New Zealand, with Helen Clark repeating her 31st March 2005 heroin import with NATO, and any murders the Labour Party wanted done. Since I have been Helen Clark's favourite by exposing her as a KGB operative, let's hit Hallett and Clark and see what we get. And I'll put in Putin for good measure, which takes us back to another era in New Zealand history. Okay, there's Helen Clark, there's Greg Hallett, there's Hallett looking relaxed like he always did. There's mafia blackmail, there's a picture of Putin, there's I believe that is Richard Prebble, and Putin in New Zealand when he was a spy down there, okay, and the people that were involved in the Fiordland issues and all of the heavy water scandal around the plants in the North Island that I only visited 1 or 2 times, and it is amazing how this man acquires the information and how potent that information is on world leadership. There's Bag Lady Baisley, okay, collectors, how the world is run on shame and stitch-ups, the World of Truth newsletters, and this is just a snippet that Greg sent to me, or I discovered on one of his websites, as publicity for the greater whole, which is his archiving of real world history. Okay, let's try and keep that up there as we go back to the story. So murder by arrangement with Mossad was spread to Prime Minister Helen Clark, and she had a meeting with General Moshe Yaalon in late November 2006. General Yaalon was to secretly return to New Zealand on the 5th to 8th December on the 5th to 8th December 2006 to inspect the training fields in New Zealand's South Island Fiordland for jungle warfare training, to discuss Israel supplying heroin to New Zealand, with Helen Clark repeating her 31st March 2005 heroin import with NATO, and any murders the Labour Party wanted done. Since I have been Helen Clark's favourite by exposing her as a KGB operative in 25th March 2002, I am on the Labour Party's hit list. As such, I was privy to this knowledge as a matter of courtesy. In other words, they tell you that you're going to get hit, and that is Helen Clark, who ended up as as the UN Development Agency leader. And when Greg Hallett was talking to me, and he was still alive on Skype, he told me that Helen Clark, in her first 3 years, I believe, at the UN, had already stolen, I can't remember whether it was $2 million or $8 million from the UN Development Agency for her private funds. Okay, and this is a Labour Party woman who wants to share. Putin is a communist. All of them are working for Intel and themselves, and to undermine every country that is subject to the treason and the war profiteering and the breaches of justice. Okay? So Greg got to know that he was on the Labour Party's hit list, and there's a little Israel owns, this is a footnote number 14, Israel owns entire states, virtually extant, in brackets, lock, stock and barrel. The most famous of these is Burma, now called Myanmar and Monaco, which they own through the Grimaldi royal family. Prince Rainier died recently of old age, requiring his son to step in and supposedly pick up the royal reins. The old man, called tax in criminal parlance, was the only tax on mafia heroin before it found its way to the United States. In reality, one civil servant in Tel Aviv kept the entire file and made all decisions, including the state of the prince's pocket money and alimony. Why the law, Dad? Why Princess Grace takes the fall? Why everybody is in it for the cash and power, and no one in the political or law enforcement sectors is in it for the future of their country or justice. On Helen Clark's request, the Mossad arranged the kidnapping of Anita McNaught's husband, Fox News cameraman Olaf Wigg, aged 36, and Fox News reporter Steve Sintani, 60, from their vehicle by masked gunmen near the Palestinian security headquarters in Gaza City on Monday, 14th August 2006. It was to last 13 days. The 2+ translator had been driving a Fox 24-hour mobile news truck when they were blocked off in a side street. Masked gunmen told the translator to go and alert Fox. Wigg and Santini then had their heads covered, were placed in a small car, and had their equipment removed naturally. All experts agree that the kidnapping lacked the usual signs of a Palestinian hostage drama, and all Palestinian militant factions called for the release of the journalists, as none of them were aware of who the new kidnapping group was. A DVD made on the subject asked if any Israeli Secret Service organisation was behind the kidnapping. All major groups in Gaza denied having anything to do with the kidnapping. As a last resort, suspicion was centred on the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, which is linked to the Fatah, but then their organisation name is often invoked when no one else can be found responsible. You now know that every one of those false religions is a false religion. It's been created by the world owners to create friction and to confuse the people into thinking that they're under threat, not from bastards like her or from any of the G8 leaders for decade after decade after decade and century after century. They are under threat from the world's elites and the medias that protect them, and the law that were portrayed in the Devil's Advocate film as being the key to ownership of the world. Why the law, Dad? The question asked by Kevin to the devil. Okay, Anita McNaught just happened to be in nearby Syria working for the BBC, covering a story in South Lebanon, and for the New Zealand media covering stories for TVNZ's Close Up and for the national radio. She was being supported by her fellow reporter and lesbian flatmate. Fox News then contacted McNaught and provided her with a car and driver to take her through Jordan to Israel. This was now gripping international news. Fox News are the recipients of all of my emails to 50 media organisations over the last 5 years. All of them sit on the news. They manipulate the world, and a lot of them know about the religious fraud at Fox News because they drop little hints into their every interview, and loads of the presenters have published books on the fraud that is Christianity, but they do not declare it openly as a fraud. They continue to cover it up as a money stream. Okay, back to Greg's writings. This was now gripping international news. Under Helen Clark's instructions, the New Zealand Ministry of Trade and Foreign Affairs then said it would send staff posted near Israel to assist in negotiations with Palestinian authorities. All of Anita McNaught's interviews with Lebanese people were then shown. These were done while she was on assignment with the Television News New Zealand, thus promoting her. This was then followed by an interview with Hezbollah spokesman Ibrahim Musawi and author Robert Fisk reporting for the independent UK newspaper, then a special report on Human Rights Watch investigator Mark Gerlasco and former senior Pentagon intelligence officer Nadim Houri, an ex-New York lawyer who worked on the Rwanda Tribunal and the Iraq Oil for Food Inquiry and Israeli war crimes. It never ends. Anita then interviewed Lebanese MP Ghassan Mukhabir, who has been building a case to take Israel's leaders to the World Court to be charged with war crimes against the Lebanese people. This was followed by an interview with David Shearer, New Zealander of the Year and fellow Auckland Architecture School old boy, sensible enough to drop out, who is head of the UN's humanitarian effort in Lebanon. That's the UN's theft project in Lebanon, land grabs project in Lebanon, and in every country across the world. That's why they're there. That's why they recruit people like her. That's why they recruit the banking leaders and Gordon Brown, to propagandise the brutalisation of the whole world. That's George Lees, not Greg Hallett, speaking. Okay. All of this built up Anita McNaught's credentials with the absolute support of Television New Zealand, under which Helen Clark is now dominated by homosexuals, bisexuals, child abusers and every other form of sexual deviant, so much so that homosexuals are now promoted over heterosexuals, not because of talent, but because they will provide cover for Helen Clark and Anita McNaught's lesbianism, and will supply cover for every other form of government and judicial crimes in exchange for providing cover for their own sexuality, many of them married for cover. During the kidnapping, Wagan Sintani said they were in good hands, and Anita McNaught said, "I cannot for the life of me see what gains anyone makes by this. It's tragically misguided." Yes, it was, Anita. Palestinian security officials said the kidnapping was unusual and unprecedented, since the captors hadn't identified themselves or made any demands for justice. Okay, I think you can see where this is going. All of it is about treason all around the world, for profit and for media manipulation. And these are relatively trivial issues compared to the brutalisation of massive countries. So I'll scan down and see if there's any more to capture our attention. So Wig and McNaughton, occult mafia, American bomber Foggy on a combination of benzodrine and alcohol got lost, dropped his bombs over Darwin on the 19th February 1942. An occult mafia and the original hero, heterosexual white male who defends his children is now despised, downgraded, and treated with every suspicion bordering on treasonous. That's a bit that we've already heard on page 184 of how to take over the world. With the Tristan language from patriotic hero to homo hero. Now, the other thing that I want to bring to your attention is how they bring this into popular culture. If you watch the village people singing "Young Man, Come to the YMCA," you can see the joke about the homo hero living like Hitler in the DOS house, being involved in the brutalization of that country, being involved in the intel double agents, and being involved in the killing and the genocide of the Native Americas as people are encouraged to go west, young man. Yeah, all of it is a massive attack on society's integrity, because everyone is involved in the secret societies and the skulls that we heard about in the earlier interviews, and the religious fraud. I went to the inauguration of Leo Cushley in Edinburgh, and it was filled with American clerics. They gave the sermon. It is all over the world, and it is brutal and violent and genocidal, and it is led by world leaders who are picked for their sins. Cushley had loads of experience in sub-Saharan Africa, and every one of the politicians and the justice ministers who I've talked about, the leaders of the political parties in Scotland, were at that celebration. All of the politicians suck up to the religious cults and the religious creeds that are there to steal from the free world that used to be a pagan world but is now under their heel. Okay? So patriotism is now a dangerous angle. The solution, it appears, is to yell F in the family courts and the Catholic Church at any given chance, then claim Anglo-Saxon allegiance. F is considered a swear word because it explains history better than any other, especially the British royal family. F means farmer, and F&C means this court is too small-minded to farm and not worth adding anything to cultivate. In Anglo-Saxon, shit you F or C's translate into modern English as my experience of this court is unpleasant and your minds are too small to cultivate. Everything is corrupted, and there's the llama, which is now converted to a rocking horse. And the other day when I talked about the religious fraud, I forgot to confirm that Jesus was born in a stable, which is another joke about the predominance of the Piso family and the linkage of their name to the hippos word, which is the horse. Jesus was born in a stable. Jesus was never born. All of these stories are made up, and the things that we hear about feudal life, that people in the human race do not have a life until 1914, when we began to teach them how to read and write. Then the world begins to change, as the Pisos knew it would. When this story gets out, your children will be free of all of the tyranny that has been superimposed on them for all of human existence. Yeah, the people on this earth believe they are more powerful than the gods that created this universe. I know that that is about to be reversed, and it will come about more quickly if the ordinary people of the world rally round. You're now allowed to have sex with your wife. You're now allowed to marry someone even if you're homeless and you live in the DOS house. See the improvement that has been effected. The politicians are still corrupted. The politicians are still bought by the money lenders that Jesus, in inverted commas, warned us about. And the people in the media still make the jokes that give the game away. They laugh at the war dead, they laugh at the impoverished, they laugh like Jimmy Savile did when he was grooming children for the royals, which is why they were given the knighthoods and they were placed in the Knights of Malta category. It is absolutely abysmal, and the people that are involved in it are let me just finish off with Greg's. The UN can be challenged with such Anglo-Saxon and World War I diction as F off, you effer seas, get the F out of my country, you renters. Truth and the news meet when the llama shits like a rocking horse. Okay, it's all a bit jocular in the last few paragraphs of this sample of his writing, but the bit at the beginning about, you know, the fake discovery of America and the treatment of the world's people and the world's pagans at the hands of the world's owners for all of that genocidal period. The Old Testament was also written by the same team, and I've emphasised that for you by the Yemen jokes, and the Yemen joke is about the yeah bit, which is oy vey, oy vey, oy vey. We've ended up with Mossad's turn to take over the world, and Greg has explained how the handover for the power base was effected in 2012. That is handing over the power and the ownership of the world to Israel, which is why all of the political parties in the UK are affiliated and friends of Israel. It's official. They changed the laws of succession the same year so that Prince Charles' illegitimate children are the only successors to the illegitimate throne that killed Greg Hallett because of his truths. If he's still alive, I want him to get in touch with me, because I need to work with him on making the world stable and making the world prosperous again. There's no point in him hiding in the dark. If he took a bung from the New World Order, let him just declare who paid him the money. I know that the gods will protect him, and I know that justice will be done in the end, and the world will be prosperous as God designed it, or as the gods designed it to be. I'm going to sign off there now. That came from www.greghallett.com/pdf/HTTOTW 20% percentage 20 web, comma, percentage 20 chapters, comma, percentage 20 low, percentage 20 res, comma, 17.7.08 / how percentage 22 percentage 20 take 20 over, and I presume that it's the world, but I will post it on the URL, on the text for this video. And thank you, lucky stars, you were born into this generation. You have had a wonderful life, no matter where you live on the world, compared to what it was like in feudal times. That's before World War I, and they had summer wars just to keep the numbers down in the UK in that period. It's amazing. And remember that the UK is part of the dominant monarchies that now rule the world and have ruled the world ever since the world's rulers came out of the Roman court and declared themselves to be kings and queens in other countries, rather than being the Caesars that owned the world by military violence and religious cheating and religious fraud. They have owned the minds of the masses because of the Piso master plan and the writings that even take you into the Old Testament, which is founded in the Garden of Eden, which is the Garden of the Yemen now, explained by Noam Chomsky, the world's leading socialist, who now is paid by the millionaire Arianna Huffington. I'm going to sign off. That's Greg. I do miss his company. I hope that he's still alive and that he will get in touch with me and begin to work on the resolution of these horrendous issues. The politicians can be shamed. The spates of resignations that are now coming in because of the acts of God, the abdications of the kings, queens, and the revelations that the bastards laugh at the Anzac war dead. Greg would be ballistic about that revelation. He was never able to make it for himself. I don't know if he understood the Mr. Bean situation. As a loyal Anzac, I believe he would have been grievously offended by it, even although he understands the nature of the world's leadership for all of human history. Okay, bye-bye. Christmas is coming. Nobody has a conscience.